We are also joined today by Val, who is joining us from Scotland. She's waving right now. She's in Dunblane, Scotland, and she'll be helping with our question and answer segment. She runs our on-site operations for the Central Scotland Untour.
Oh, you got it. I know that's
Okay, so once again, if you haven't muted yourself yet, I would request that you mute yourself. Otherwise, we're going to get started here. So I'm going to ask Cathrin to take it away.
Okay. Well, hello again, everybody. It's really good to have such a full house today. So I'm the director of our Scotland Untours. I've been with the company for over 20 years. And our Scotland program started back in 2016. Today, I'm hoping to share some of my knowledge and my passion for Scotland with you. Most of the photos in the presentation that you're going to see were actually taken by me on various trips to Scotland, but I also borrowed some pictures from other sources. So I would say lean back and enjoy. So can everybody see the screen? Okay, great. So we're here today to answer three important questions. Why Scotland, why Untours, and where should we stay? But before I go into much more detail, let's take a little look at the map. So here we have Scotland. Scotland takes up the northern third of Great Britain. It's surrounded by water, as you all know. It can be roughly divided into the lowlands, down here. So below Stirling, they include Glasgow, Edinburgh, and further south here, this is cut off. I couldn't quite fit that in the slide. And then the Highlands. And of course, there are lots of islands. Scotland actually has over 700 islands, and some of these can be reached from our home bases, which we'll talk about in more detail later. But I just want to kind of mention them briefly here. So our Central Scotland Untour is based in Stirling, in the town of Stirling itself, and some surrounding farms. And then the lovely small town of Dunblane, which is a little bit north of Stirling. It's not marked on the map here. So Stirling is really in a great position. It's kind of right on the border between the Highlands and the lowlands. So there are lots of trip options, which we'll talk about later. And then we have our Highlands Untour, which is based in the city of Inverness and in the small village, fishing village of Ardesia, right in this very corner here on the Moray Firth. And by the way, there are about 5.4 million Scots, and the heaviest concentration of the population is down here in this central belt. As you can see, the big cities, and Stirling would be part of that. As far as airports go, if you are interested in our Central Scotland Untour, you would fly into Edinburgh, and for the Highlands, it would be Inverness. So moving on, I'm sure something that attracts a lot of you to Scotland are the beautiful landscapes. And there's really a smattering of everything. You have mountains, you have rolling hills, sandy beaches, and again, the islands that I mentioned. And there are some of the best scenic drives and rail journeys that you'll find anywhere in the world. The UK also has 15 national parks, and 2 of those are located in Scotland. I'm just going to skip back to the map very quickly. So one of them is Cairngorms National Park, right here, and which is kind of between the Central and the Highlands Untour, but it's a little bit closer from the Highlands Untour. And the other one is a little hard to see here, Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park, and that is close to our Central Scotland Untour. So Scotland, of course, has a rich and fascinating history. There were tribal Celts and ancient Picts, Roman conquerors, Vikings, and revered clansmen. In Stirling, you'll hear the name William Wallace mentioned a lot from famous Battle of Stirling in 1297. Some of you may be familiar with William Wallace from the movie Braveheart. Then, of course, the famous and tragic massacre of Glencoe. This is the picture here on the left. And on the right, we see a picture from actually taken from Stirling Castle. And in the background here, we see the Wallace Monument just outside Stirling. And of course, many of these historic sites can be toured, and there are typically also museums or visitor centers where you can learn about the history. As many of you know, Scotland has a myriad of castles. They come in all shapes, sizes, styles, and ages. Stirling has one of the best and most visited castles in Scotland. But then, of course, there's also famous Edinburgh Castle, Doune Castle, which is near Dunblane, Hodder Castle of Macbeth fame, and Dunrobin Castle, just to name a few. This picture here I took on the way back from a wonderful excursion to the Isle of Skye, and I actually booked an organized tour to kind of see as much as possible in a day. And we came over the bridge from Skye onto the mainland and drove towards this castle. It's called Eilean Donnan Castle. It's the apparently the most photographed castle in Scotland, and it was just a spectacular sight as we kind of arrived at sundown and the castle was lit. Something I didn't know or was not aware of is that Scotland has a lot of wonderful architecture and famous design to offer. I fell in love with the Art Deco of Charles Rennie Mackintosh. We see this chair as an example here in the middle. And other examples are the relatively new Riverside Museum in Glasgow. And the Kelpies here on the right. It's an outdoor sculpture. I don't know if you can see the people, so you can kind of get an idea of the scale. They were done by a Scot. Andy Scott actually is his name. They're about 100 feet tall, and they are near Falkirk, near our Central Scotland Untour. And then this picture may be familiar to a lot of you who may be Harry Potter fans. It's the Glenfinnan Viaduct on the West Highland rail line. Scotland has two great cities in the central belt area, Glasgow and Edinburgh. Glasgow is Scotland's largest city. And before I went there, I kind of had the idea that Glasgow was a very industrial city, and I wasn't really too keen on visiting. But then Val, our staff person, who is a native Glaswegian, actually talked me into going and gave me some tips, and I was quite impressed. I highly recommend it. Glasgow has incredible architecture. It has a very charming area called the West End with cobblestone streets and quaint little shops, and also a great art museum here on the right. This is Kelvin Grove Art Museum, and it actually became one of my favorite museums in all of Scotland. And by the way, Glasgow and Edinburgh can very easily be reached by public transportation from our central Scotland Untour. And many of the museums in Glasgow and Edinburgh and other parts of Scotland are free of charge. So now we've arrived in Edinburgh, of course, the capital of Scotland, smaller by population and size than Glasgow. But it has a medieval old town and a very elegant Georgian new town. Its history is best explored by visiting famous Edinburgh Castle or the Scottish National Gallery. I would also encourage you to visit the Scottish Parliament, which is a fabulous modern building, and it offers very interesting tours to the public. Another great feature about Scotland are the many scenic drives that you can take. Here we have a map of central Scotland. So just to get our bearings, here we have Stirling and Dunblane, and you can see that you can really drive in any direction. And for scenic drives, you can go east along the coast of Fife and St. Andrews. You can go north to Inverness, or from here up to Pitlochry, or of course west towards Loch Lomond. There are several roads and the Trossachs National Park. So looking at the Highlands, no shortage of scenic drives there. Here we have Inverness, and here's our little home base of Ardersier. Same is true here. You can go in all kinds of directions, but probably the most famous drive in the Highlands is the relatively newly created North Coast 500 route. It goes all along the perimeter of the northern part here. It's about 516 miles long, but parts of it can be done as day trips from Inverness. And for those who are not keen on driving or who just want to take a break from the car, there are also some wonderful rail journeys. I actually took 3 of those. My very first one was from Stirling to Glasgow, and then I connected on the West Highland line, which can either go to Oban, or you can continue onto Fort William and Mallaig if you want to go over the famous Glenfinnan Viaduct. And the trip to Oban can be done in a long day trip, and you have a few hours of a layover in Oban. And there's also a wonderful distillery that I'll talk about a little bit later. Then we have the Stirling to Inverness line that goes right through Cairngorms National Park. That takes about 3 hours. And some of you who may be interested in combining central Scotland and the Highlands will either do this drive by car or they'll choose to go by train. Another trip I took was from Inverness all the way to Thurso. That takes about 4 hours. And part of the journey actually hugs the coast. You also go past Dunrobin Castle, which you can see from the train, and you go through beautiful landscape and a lot of peat bogs. And then there's last but not least, there's the Kyle line, which goes from Inverness all the way over to Kyle of Lochalch. Unfortunately, you can't go over to the Isle of Skye. There's no rail service, but this is also a wonderful trip, and it's a shorter one. It only takes 2.5 hours. And when you are tired from all this touring, you may want to have some whiskey or some beer. Whiskey is, of course, Scotland's national drink and its biggest export. It's very much enjoyed by the Scots themselves and by people around the world. Believe it or not, Scotland has over 130 active distilleries in 5 different whiskey regions, and touring a distillery is a perfect activity for a rainy day. And some of them can even be reached by public transportation. So my picture here is from the Oban distillery. I mentioned I had taken this train trip and had a few hours of a layover in Oban before returning. So I had booked a tour ahead of time, and that is highly recommended because they do sell out. I'm not a big fan of the kind of peaty whiskeys, so this was a little more fruity and had a ever so slight sweetness to it. So I really liked it a lot. It was right up my alley. Scotland is also known for its, or actually wasn't known to me, but now I know that Scotland has great food and a number of award-winning restaurants. It's of course known for its seafood. I'm a pescatarian, so I'm not into the meat pies, but I hear that people enjoy them immensely. They can be had at restaurants, and you can also buy them in butcher shops. I know that clients have told me there's a butcher shop in Dunblane, and they really love the meat pies there. I have more of a sweet tooth, so I included this picture on the left. Another thing that Val, our staff person, turned me on to, this is Tilly's Tea Room, and it's actually they're award-winning bakers. There's one in Stirling, and then this one is in Dunblane. And I have to admit that I did not only go there once. This little picture up here is another little discovery that I made. Was recommended by our Highland staff person, Duncan. They're called Turnocks tea cakes, and they're delicious little things that they come in packs of 6, I believe, and they also make great little souvenirs to bring home too. And then we have Highland Games. This is definitely high on my list for my next trip. I have not been able to attend one, but I hear there are just very memorable events for people who have the good fortune of participating in one. They're held outdoors, typically across all over Scotland. There's a calendar. They're held from May to September. They're built around traditional Highland sports like the tug of war or hammer throw. And there's always music and dancing, of course, and food. And then there are other events, and this may be one of the most famous ones. It's the picture from the Royal Edinburgh Military Tattoo, which is held every August against the backdrop of Edinburgh Castle that we see in the back. And it must be a spectacular sight. There are about 1,000 musicians, pipers, drummers, singers, and dancers that gather. And then the culminating event is a lone piper standing on the castle ramparts and is playing a haunting lament. And then in the end, there are fireworks, and there's a mass chorus of Auld Lang Syne from the audience. Another event that's high on my list for a return trip. If you like music, Scottish music, you'll see bagpipers pretty much in every bigger town or city. So you'll definitely see them in Stirling, in Inverness, in Edinburgh, and in Glasgow. And they typically wear the tartan and the whole outfit. But music can really be enjoyed in many pubs, theaters, and other venues. This is a picture of Hootenannies in Inverness. It's right in downtown Inverness. It was voted one of the best Scottish music venues. I went there twice and had great fun. And once I even sat at a table with three couples from the US, two from Pennsylvania, small world. And in our central Scotland area, there is the Settle Inn in Stirling, and musicians. It's a very old pub. Musicians gather there once a week for kind of more of an informal jam session. And Val and I went there once, and once they found out that I was German, they even played a little German tune for me, which was very sweet. The traditions are alive and well in Scotland. On the right, we see Lizzie. She is a professional storyteller, and she sometimes joins our Highlands orientation. The picture here on the left was taken at a wonderful little museum in Inverness, where you can learn everything about tartans and the traditions and the kind of resurgence after they were forbidden after the Battle of Culloden. And you can even see kilts being made there. So this would be another wonderful rainy day activity. And last but not least, there are the friendly people. We have a smattering here of staff and hosts. Yes. Val on the right with Anne. She owns our Vallis View 2 and 3 apartments, and she is actually she runs a sheep farm all by herself with the help of her daughter. And on the left we have Duncan McKellar, our Highland staff person, and Laura. She's the host of our Crown View apartment. Sorry. So this concludes the first part of our presentation, and now we are going to talk about why Untours, what are the benefits of traveling with Untours. I want to talk a little bit about the history of Untours first. In the middle, you see Hal Tausig. Hal founded the company in 1975. And he was a teacher and took his wife and then 16-year-old daughter to Europe, and they stayed in small hotels all over the place. And then he got to Switzerland and he realized that there were vacation apartments that you could rent. And it was just so much better. They could spread out, they could, it was more economical, they could fix some of their own meals. And he came back to the US and first invited a group of friends that he took over, and they all were so just so thrilled with the whole experience that they basically talked him into making this a business. So this is how it started. This is a picture from an early picture taken on the Swiss Heartland Untour in Meiringen. And don't worry, we don't expect you to show up in a suit and bow tie for your Scotland Untour. But what I also wanted to illustrate with this is that we have lots of experience and the long history. And in fact, Untours was the first ever company in the US that promoted apartment living. Nowadays, this is very normal, but we were the pioneers. So your Untour includes, apart from the apartment, it includes lots of planning and support. We have the experience in the media office, and then we also have our staff people overseas, Val and our two Duncans that run the Highlands Untour together. We help with pre-trip planning. We have our own guidebooks, one for Central Scotland and one for the Highlands. We also send you a regional map for planning. We're available by email, by phone, by chat. If you have any questions. Nowadays, we also we monitor the ever-changing COVID requirements before and during your trip. Our staff will know where to get tested should that still be necessary by the time you travel. We also stock your apartment with basic foods, just some basic, we call them welcome supplies, so you don't have to dash out to the store right away after you arrive. We also give you an orientation on the day after your arrival, paired with some sightseeing and the cultural event. And our local staff, Val and Duncan, will be available to you by phone throughout your stay, well beyond the orientation. One of the biggest perks of the Untour is apartment living. So you only unpack once. You have your basic welcome grocery supplies. You set your own schedule. You can stop and smell the roses. You're not getting up at 5:30 in the morning to kind of dash on to your next destination. You live like a local. You live in a real neighborhood with neighbors and real people, and you interact with them. You interact with people when you go to the grocery store, to the bakery, or to the butcher. You may even be staying on a working farm. This up here on the right is the view from our Wallace View apartments just outside Stirling, and here we have the Wallace Monument again. And you have a cozy and relaxing place to come home to at the end of the day, and you may even have a great view, like from this one. This is a view from our Riverbend cottages, and again the Wallace Monument. We also include a rental car in the package. For Scotland, we include automatic cars. We also lend you or our local staff will lend you a pre-programmed GPS. The cars are typically picked up in Stirling for the Central Scotland Untour or in Inverness for the Highlands Untour. But they can really be picked up and dropped off anywhere there's an enterprise location in the UK. And drop-off fees may apply for that. The cars can be kept beyond the end of the Untour, and they can also be picked up before the Untour starts. And of course, there would be additional fees for that as well. I just wanted to also mention our car-free option for people who are reluctant to drive. So you would pick a centrally located apartment. I'm sorry, that would rule out the farms, but if you base yourself in Inverness directly, or in Stirling, or in Dunblane, you have access to trains and buses. And we would give you a discount off of the Untour package, and give you advice on the best planning, how to get around. There are two options. You could pay for your own rail and bus tickets as you go, or if you plan on taking some of those rail journeys, it may be worth purchasing a Scotland Rail Pass. Another major point when you travel on an Untour is you support the Untours Foundation. The foundation was set up quietly by Hal in the early 1990s. And nowadays it's run by our wonderful team of Elizabeth Killow and Jonathan Coleman. The foundation was actually a big part when I applied with Untours some 20 years ago. I already loved everything about the company, but that really clenched the deal for me. And the foundation works to alleviate poverty in the Philadelphia region, across the US and in the world, by providing low interest loans, Hal always used to say it's a hand up, not a handout. Okay, now we're coming to the last part. Where should we stay? Big question. Should I stay in central Scotland? Should I stay in the Highlands? Just a quick look at the map again. Inverness and Ardersier up here, and Stirling and Dunblane are done here. And don't worry, if you cannot decide, we also offer what's called a sampler, where you could do a week in each location. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. So let's start with central Scotland. Our apartments are based, as I had mentioned before, in the town of Stirling, the surrounding countryside, and in Dunblane. Here we have some pictures of Stirling. Stirling is a city, and it's the gateway to the Highlands. So you have many possibilities for sightseeing, and you kind of really have the best of both worlds here. You can visit charming small towns, castles, gardens. There are some distilleries nearby. Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park are within easy reach. There's excellent train and bus service to Glasgow and Edinburgh in less than an hour. And of course, Stirling itself is full of historic monuments, sweeping views, and has one of Scotland's best castles. They offer wonderful tours. I highly recommend it. And from here, you can also head south to the border abbeys, Scotland Chapel, or east towards St. Andrews and the coast of Fife. And another location in central Scotland, I've mentioned it a number of times, is the small town of Dunblane. This is where Val is right now. That's her chosen hometown. Dunblane is one of my favorite locations in Scotland. Just from the moment I stepped off the train, I just felt really welcome there. It's the kind of town where people greet you in the street. It's small, but it has some nice streets lined with shops. It has 2 grocery stores, a number of really good restaurants, pubs, of course, Tilly's Tea Room. Let's not forget that. It's home to an impressive cathedral, and it's bisected by the Allen Water. So there are wonderful walks to be had along the water. In fact, one of our apartments, the Mill Creek apartment, is located about a 10-minute walk from the center of Dunblane, and it's all along the water. I had to throw this picture in here in the middle, the mailbox. So this mailbox was painted golden in honor of Andy Murray, the tennis star, after he won the Olympics. And he's a native of Dunblane. So moving on to the Highlands, here we have our home base of Inverness. We have quite a few apartments in Inverness. It's the capital of the Highlands and the perfect departure point to go over to Loch Ness, take a boat ride on Loch Ness, see the ruins of Urquhart Castle. You can cross over to the Isle of Skye. You can do this by car, or there are also organized day trips that I can talk to you about individually. And it's also the starting point for the North Coast 500 coastal drive that I mentioned earlier. And throughout the region, there's no shortage of castles, forts, and battlefields. In fact, Culloden is just pretty much just outside of Inverness. Our second home base in the Highlands is the small fishing village of Ardersier. It's about 20 minutes north of Inverness. It's located right on the water, right on the Moray Firth. We have a number of apartments there. They are called the First View apartments. If you are staying on the top floor, you have wonderful water views. Ardesia is also home to Fort George. It's a small village, but there's a pub and a restaurant, and there's a small but extremely well-stocked grocery store. I was quite impressed when I checked it out. And the nice thing about Ardesia is it's located only 3 miles from the Inverness airport. So that makes arriving and driving really easy. It's also super convenient for day trips because it's not far from major roads. So we're coming to the end of the presentation. I have just listed some practical things here. The car-free option is available, so keep that in mind. Google Maps is a great planning tool, both for driving and for public transportation. There are other websites for driving directions that I know Val would recommend, but just to get an idea, if you have certain places you want to go to and you want to figure out how far would that be from Inverness or for Stirling, Google Maps really works well for both driving and public transportation. There are many jokes about the weather in Scotland, so my recommendation would be to dress in layers, even bring, if you have a very thin down coat, pack it, you can never be wrong. But I have to say, I've never had a single day where it rained all day. The sun always came out. Another recommendation of mine would be to check out the charity shops. You'll see them in Stirling. The main street in Stirling is lined with charity shops. There's also a good selection in Inverness. Some of them are really fabulous. They look like boutiques. You'd never know that they're secondhand stores, but they are a great resource for buying useful souvenirs. And then my last tip would be book early. Some of you may have already noticed that Scotland fills up quickly and people really book early. So if you want the apartment of your dreams, let us know early on. Some useful websites that I've listed here. The first one, of course, is our Untours UK homepage. The second one, visitscotland.com, is the official site of the Scottish National Tourist Office. Super website with lots of resources. And then the last one, scotrail.co.uk, is the official website of Scottish Rail. This one would come in handy to look up train schedules and also to purchase the Scotland Rail passes. So, thank you so much for joining us today. We would like, for sitting through this presentation, we would like to offer those who would like to book by April 8th a discount. The magic code would be Highland Cow, and you'd receive a 10% discount. And with this, I'm going to end my presentation, and I will hand over to Brian for questions and answers.
Okay, thank you, Cathrin. So now is time for questions and answers. So if you have a question, this is the time to type it out in the chat window, and we'll have an answer for you from either Cathrin or Val if you have a question about all sorts of questions about the logistics of travel as well. Okay, so the first question that I'm seeing is, let me see here. I just had a little computer glitch on my end. I'm trying to get to the questions.
I think it says best time of year to visit.
Cathrin, yeah, I think I'm going to need you to help. My computer is not working right now. It just decided to stop.
Yep. So the first question, best time of year to visit Scotland. So I would love for Val to answer this one.
Hi, everybody. In Scotland, it's very unpredictable. I was just saying to Brian and Cathrin prior to joining the call with you all that we have just had the most beautiful March, and then the temperature has suddenly dipped a little. However, traditionally, I would say May is considered one of the nicest months, and September, and thus you're avoiding school holidays and a busier season in July and August. But you know, no matter when you come, there will always be, you will enjoy it. And likewise, going into the autumn, Scotland is beautiful in autumn. So it may not have the warmer days, but you've got the stunning colours and blue skies and slightly cooler days. So it's a hard one to answer. Traditionally, it always rains the first day of the school holidays when the children finish up, July.
Okay, thank you. So somebody is asking, is it possible to hire a driver while there? I'm not knowledgeable about drivers, but I know there are tour companies. So the two tour companies that are highly rated, one is Val Scotland, that's the company I used when I went to the Isle of Skye, and then there's also Rabbies. And I think the problem with that is that they don't come to Stirling, Val, if my memory serves me right? They start, a lot of the tours start from Edinburgh.
Well, certainly for that tour, but it is very easy to hire your own driver and effectively just pay an hourly rate. There are local taxi firms that would happily do that. Generally, I think in the past, they would maybe charge around about £30, £35 an hour. So yes, lots of options if you wanted to do it on your own and not go through a private tour.
Excellent. So Brian, am I still continuing with the...
Yeah, actually, I think I'm working. I think I've got it back here. So let me go to the next question from Marilyn and Mike. How does it work to get COVID tests when it's time to return to the US? We will point you in the right direction. I don't know whether Val has selected a testing location for our clients yet. What do you think?
Well, my husband actually flew to Texas 2 weeks ago, and he just did his in Edinburgh airport. He booked in with express test and did it. It took 15 minutes. I think he got his result almost instantly. And that was the easiest because he could just do it there and then, and it didn't require an additional trip. But there are lots of options, and I can certainly provide the contact details for that.
Great. Okay. Sharon has a question about midges. When is the best time and what's the best place to avoid midges? I'm going to give that to Val, not to Cathrin.
Thank you.
Traditionally, the east coast of Scotland is considered midge-free. So the East Neuk of Fife, St Andrews, anything on the east coast. It's the west coast, Loch Lomond, all the isles in the west that would traditionally get the midges. But it all depends on the wind speed. You know, if there's no wind or a certain wind speed, if you're near water, the trees. So there are ways to avoid them, and there are lots of midge sprays and midge hats, you know, so it won't ruin your holiday.
Okay. Clark is asking about distilleries. Cathrin did mention the Oban distillery. Val, do you have any other distillery recommendations?
Oh, there are so many, and they are everywhere. As Cathrin said, there are over 100 around, even just where I live. There are, you know, there are at least, I would say, there's one in Stirling itself. There's one just north of Dunblane. There's one in Doon. So wherever you are, you won't be far from a distillery. And what you'll find a lot of now is, although they're primarily whiskey, because the whiskey takes so long to mature, they have all turned production to fantastic gin. So there are a lot of gin distilleries as well where you can sample that if you like gin.
Okay, lots of choices for alcohol in Scotland. So if Karen asks, if we took the rail option, are there day trips available for those with no cars from Stirling? Cathrin, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was there, actually both times I did not have a car. I was reluctant to drive, and Brian was not happy with me at first. But then it turned out to be actually quite fortunate. So I was the rail pioneer. There are plenty of options. So the cities Edinburgh and Glasgow, of course, are the obvious choices. They are easy, but you can get to. I'm actually looking at our Scotland on-site guide right now, and you can get to Glen Eagles, to Bridge of Ellen, to Crieff and Drummond Gardens, Callendar, Doon Castle, even Deanston Distillery, the Falkirk Wheel, the Kelpies, Culcross, Linlithgow, Loch Lomond, Trossachs National Park is doable, but that would, obviously involve some walking and hiking. You can get to Oban, you can get to the Border Abbeys, Roslin Chapel.
I think we get the idea.
Yes, basically from central Scotland, I would say the car-free option works a little bit better in central Scotland. In the Highlands, you can still get places, but it's a little bit more limited, and you would also take buses and not just trains.
Great, okay. Clark asks for comments on hiking and biking. Val, do you want to take that one?
Oh, the outdoor tourism in Scotland is just rising so rapidly. And again, you can do that anywhere. In Stirlingshire, we've got the big Hill de Myatt behind us, but you're close to Oldham and Rose, Ben Ann, you can go, it depends how far or how high you want to hike. But there are also mountain biking trails. So yeah, there are lots of options.
Great. Alice asks about botanical gardens in Edinburgh and Glasgow. I'm not sure who to ask. Val, Cathrin, either of you know much about those?
I have not been, so maybe Val could answer that.
Well, I was about to say I haven't been either, believe it or not. I think they both. I'm trying to think. The West End of Glasgow. If you're at the Botanic Gardens in Glasgow, you're a stone's throw from what Cathrin referred to as the cobblestones of the West End, Ashton Lane, not far from Kelvin Grove Art Gallery. So you could take in a number of other things. But equally, I'm sure the Edinburgh one is absolutely stunning and close to other attractions. So I don't think you'll go wrong in choosing either. But I can certainly do some more research and come back to anybody that would like a more thorough review or comparison.
Yeah, well, if you happen to come across some information on that, maybe we can send it out to everybody just as we would at an orientation. If you stump us at orientation, it's not the end of the story. We get back to you with an answer one way or the other. So Joan would like to know whether it's feasible to take a day trip to Oban on to Mallaig from Stirling. Now, Cathrin, you talked about that rail trip. Do you want to answer that?
Sure. So Joan, you can get to Oban and back in a day, but you cannot go on to Mallaig and return to Stirling in a day. You'd have to do an overnight.
Okay, that's a clear answer. Martha would like to know whether they should bring a do-it-yourself COVID test, or is that not valid? I'm going to ask Cathrin maybe to answer that if you happen to know.
So I know there are some tests where you can't just take a rapid test, like one of those government tests. That wouldn't work. But there are tests where you then also call into a physician, and you have basically a physician on, over Zoom or some some other means, and they certify that your test was negative. So it would have to be one of those tests. It can't just be an over-the-counter.
Yeah, if I can just add, you need nothing to come into the UK now, I believe, but going back, it just needs to be supervised. So that's why the airport one is an easy option.
Mhm.
Yeah. And Val, I'm wondering, do the pharmacies, Boots Pharmacy, I know at some point they were doing COVID testing. Are they still doing that?
Yes, it's just trying to, I'd have to check out which ones offer you, as you say, the supervised that would do it, an issue with the correct certificate. But
Right.
things are changing, so it would just depend what's required to get back into the States. But certainly on arrival here, there is nothing. You don't need to provide any COVID test on arrival in the UK, I believe.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. So Martha, look into the COVID test, the do-it-yourself COVID test for your, that's, I assume, for your return home that you're thinking about that. And if it's done, if it's supervised over the internet, it should be fine. We've had clients who've asked us that before, and there are some reputable companies out there that offer those. Alice would like to know, are there summer concerts available, especially organ recitals in cathedrals or choral concerts? Val?
Well, certainly in Dunblane, where I live, there are always concerts going on in the cathedral. And Glasgow, absolutely, there, that's what we're known for, festivals right throughout the year. So if there was any specific area, again, I could certainly find out, but I've got no doubt in saying, yes, there will be.
Cathrin, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope.
Okay. Clark asks, are there ferries to the islands, for instance, to Campbelltown? Well, Val knows those ferries, I think, pretty well by now.
All the ferries are run by Calmac, and there are island hopping passes. So you can get to any island via this one website called Calmac, CALMAC. So you can look at where you are going to. But Campbelltown, unless I am wrong, I'm going to quickly check my map. You do not need a ferry to. Wait till I just check before I make a fool of myself.
And by the way, I'm noticing that Andrew says that Inverness has a well-reputed botanical garden. Thank you, Andrew.
Perfect.
Outsourcing information here. This is great.
But any island you want to get to, definitely Calmac, very easy to use.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Val. Is there parking at the Glasgow train station? That's Leighton who's asking that one. Leighton.
Would you like me to answer that?
Yes, sure. That's
yeah, all the stations will have parking, but it will be paid.
okay. Fair enough.
So wherever you go, yes, the closer you are to a bigger city centre, the more expensive it is. So in Dunblane, for example, you can park slightly back from the station for free, but the big cities, Stirling, Glasgow, Edinburgh, would be paid. But what I would strongly advise is not taking a car to the city centres, because it's very easy to get around, and you've got other hazards to negotiate, like bus lane cameras. If you drive in the wrong lane at the wrong time, that can incur a fine. So unless you really need a car in the city, like I personally would never take a car to the city. So you can do a park and ride and park just on the outskirts of the city, and then, for example, hop on a bus to take you right into the city centre.
Perfect. Okay. Martha has a question about the health locator.
I can take that.
What's the answer to that, Cathrin? Is it necessary or not?
No, so I think Martha is talking about the health locator form, which was required until recently, but is no longer required. So you can ignore that. Not needed anymore.
Okay. And we have a page on our website where we keep those things updated. If you go to our homepage and click on the COVID link, you can get to the latest information on COVID requirements country by country. Kathy asks, are credit cards accepted everywhere, or do some smaller places want cash only? thinking mostly of the Highlands on that one. Cathrin?
That's a good question. I don't know if smaller places would accept credit cards.
Val?
Yeah, I would say, especially post-COVID, a lot of places did away with cash. So most places are set up to accept cards. If it was a very small, I don't know, pop-up shop in somebody's garden, possibly not. But yes, any kind of shop or restaurant, cafe would all, I imagine, take credit cards.
Great, great.
Good to know. Great.
And just to confirm about Campbelltown, you would just drive to Campbelltown. No need for a ferry.
Great. Good answer. Okay. Alice asks about genealogy. A good place to check out genealogy. I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but Val, do you want to take a crack at that?
Well, everybody's wanting to research history, so there are lots of options. There's the huge library in Glasgow, the Mitchell Library, but actually just outside Stirling, we have the Alloa Library, which apparently is very good for genealogy. But there are other local experts that would do it for you if you wanted some help. Obviously, there would probably be a charge for that, but I could at least, again, find out about that.
Okay, yeah, it wouldn't be bad to have some sort of resource for genealogy. That sounds like a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, we've reached the end of our question and answer period. Thank you, everybody. It's been fun talking to you about a place that you can tell all of us really love. So we are here to answer any additional questions. You can go to our website and contact us by email, by phone. We're here and we'd love to talk to you more about Scotland. So thank you everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Good